and welcome to the big picture. For the last several days and weeks, we have seen the tensions between Israel and Iran escalating. A lot of talk is being made about how, where it will all lead to. Recently, a senior US defense official even talked about Israel possibly attacking Iran. Amidst all these tensions, a couple of days back, we saw on the streets of Delhi an Israeli diplomat's car being bombed. So this has put India right in between the tensions which is prevailing between Israel and Iran. So what does it mean, these tensions? What are the strategic challenges for India amidst these tensions? So to discuss that, I have with me a very distinguished panel of guests. Mr. Ronen, former Indian ambassador to the US. Mr. S.Nihal, former editor of the Khaleej Times and a veteran journalist who has worked in the region for a long time. Mr. Bansidhar Pradhan, associate professor in the West Asian Studies of the Jawaharlal Nehru University, and Mr. Sanjay Kapoor, editor of the Hard News. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Sen, these bomb attacks, let us just start from the bomb attacks and how we have got caught in between these tensions. Now, where do we stand as far as these two countries are concerned, which are at daggers drawn with each other? I will come to the US role and all that later.
But let's say on the attack, I'm glad that you put the title in this way, because I think unfortunately, a number of people are just talking about it in terms of India, US and US sanctions, etc.
Right.
You have, I think, put it in the right perspective. Now, here is a bomb attack which was straightforward, a terrorist attack. And it was a terrorist attack on a diplomat of another country.
Right.
And the first reaction is, and I think it should be, that of condemning this attack in unequivocal terms, and also expressing the hope or the resolve to bring the perpetrators to justice.
Right.
That is fundamental.
Yes.
And when you pointed out that where we are being drawn in, and this is very serious,
Yes.
because an attack has occurred on our soil, and we wouldn't like to be a playground for this, and particularly for this type of atrocity, because our central position has been that terrorism cannot be viewed in compartments, should not be seen in regional context,
right,
or in a sub-regional context. It's a global threat, and
or
should
in
be handled globally.
Or even in a religious context.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But it has to be viewed in a global context.
Right.
So we are all responsible, and this has been brought home to us increasingly. Not for the first time. Of course, in Bombay we had that first attack where the targets were very clearly identified, including Jewish targets, and for the first time in more than 2,000 years.
That India has become a playground.
No, that you had a Jewish target in India.
In India.
You had Jews were discriminated against in Europe and elsewhere, but never in India.
Yeah.
So 26/11 that way was a watermark.
Right.
So, but this is a further.
So these are serious challenges which India as a country faces, the government faces, and how to deal with this situation. Let me come to Mr. Nihal Singh. Mr. Nihal Singh, is there any doubt now that who perpetrated? Because now Israel seems to be convinced that it is the Iran which has perpetrated this bomb attacks on our soil. So where do we stand here?
Well, to begin with, I think so far the government has taken the right stand in terms of saying that unless we have real proof to substantiate it, it would be totally irresponsible for us to say so. Now, the assumption, of course, is that because of the fact that there were targets in Thailand, in Tbilisi, and in New Delhi, that there is a connection between them. There again, that remains to be proved.
Absolutely.
So obviously, although Israel has its own interests, which is very apparent, in saying straight away, condemning it, of course we condemn the act of terrorism, but saying holding Iran responsible
jumping
for it,
to the conclusion that
and associate Hezbollah. We can't say so at the moment.
Yes.
That is point one. The second point is that I do not think that as a country like India can stay aloof from what is happening in the region.
Right.
Because there is this ferment, the so-called Arab Spring, which is a year old now, which is sweeping across the region. It's a new Arab world fighting with the old, the traditional Arab world. Secondly, I think the question of the great powers or the big powers or the medium powers playing their own games, that's very much so. We all know Israel's attitude towards the Israelis and how their policies revolve around Israel's security, plus, of course, the question of oil and other interests.
Yes, we'll discuss that. Mr. Pradhan, now it is today, yesterday actually, India has again gone and voted in favor of the resolution against Syria. All these issues are interrelated. What we are seeing in this bomb blast, and then the tensions between Israel and Iran, the way Iran showed its nuclear strength the other day, all these are related. Now, India, do you think India did the right thing yesterday in supporting the resolution against Syria?
Well, in answer to your pointed question, in fact, yesterday there was a seminar I was attending. In my opinion, this was India should have acted more cautiously. There was enough option. India should have abstained rather than voting in favor of the resolution, because what are the implications? If you see Hardipuri's statement, it's not only confusing, it's misleading. We are talking about engaging for political dialogue.
Yes.
And how can you answer political dialogue when you are absolving another side, which is equally perpetrator of violence? If you compare that with Hardipuri's statement earlier, October 4th, when we abstained, he made it very clear. Violence is violence, whosoever may be the perpetrator.
Right.
So therefore, in this case, honestly, India burnt its fingers by voting in favor of it. Thereby, you are losing your trust that you decline the option of being a mediator. Decline. This always I emphasize. Sir, the BRICS phenomena.
Anyway, let me get actually Mr. Ronen say on this, sir. Mr. Bansidhar's point that India could have abstained. In fact, we had a discussion last week also on this Syrian UN Security Council resolution. There are some voices saying that India would have been better off abstaining than voting in favor.
Well, I think right now, we have come to a stage where if we have any aspirations or even pretensions of playing any role globally, I think we'll have to learn we'll have to take positions. There will be debates in our country, and it's a healthy debate because most things are not very clear-cut in terms of what is right and what is wrong. But at the same point, at some point of time, we will have to make our positions clear. We will not be able to sit on the fence.
Let me come to Sanjay. Sanjay, in fact, was in Syria a couple of months back. He traveled there. Briefly on Syria, we will have to come back to Iran and the Israel thing. So what is your view? Do you agree with Mr. Bansidhar, or you think we have to take a position instead of abstaining?
Since the time we became the temporary member to the Security Council, I think there's been a debate which has been going around in the country that we need to take a position. And taking a position actually has meant succumbing to the pressure of the West on certain issues. So even on the issue of damning Syria or damning Iran, increasingly you would see that since 1991, when Israel got recognition by the government of India, this entire Israeli lobby has kind of got currency in this country, and they have been able to garner a great amount of support. So taking stand on certain issues is gravitating towards a certain point of view. I mean, we have to decide whether it is,
absolutely
our national interest to be taking those positions.
Absolutely. The argument, sir, Mr. Nihal Singh, is that in this battle between Israel and Iran, and where Syria also, somewhere in the vicinity, all this, India should purely look at it from its own national interest and not succumb to any pressure from any side. Is it a possible thing at all in this kind of?
I think we are looking after our interests in this particular instance. And we voted in favor because we are looking after our interests. Secondly,
how does it serve the interests of India voting in?
No, because we have a whole body, the Arab League, whatever its internal problems might be, has taken a certain very clear stand. And not only at the Security Council, but in the General Assembly now.
Right.
Saying that
But
let
people talk of
Assad step aside.
But people talk of the hypocrisy of this, Gulf Arab League. Only most of the countries themselves are facing those problems.
The point is that we live in a world of hypocrisies.
Yes.
I mean, after all, the United States, its attitude to the unrest in Bahrain.
Yes, exactly.
Compare that to
the way it's
Syria and et cetera. We all know that.
Yes.
That's a fact of life. Well, the problem is that we had to make up our minds, and unfortunately, we traditionally, because of, I suppose, it's easier under the guise of non-alignment not to take positions.
Right.
That we are used to being passive in most major world issues.
Right.
Now, as Ronen was saying, we can't afford to be that.
We can't afford to be that anymore.
Yes.
That's what you're trying to say. Okay, we will continue this discussion. We need to go into a short break now. We'll come back soon. Please keep watching. Welcome back. We are discussing the Israel-Iran tensions and what kind of strategic challenges that India will face because of that. Let me come to you, Mr. Singh. Now, there is a pressure on India to vote in the UN Security Council against Iran. Israel is trying to put pressure on us. I'm sure the US also will be trying to put pressure on us. Where do we stand there? If that situation comes up, which is bound to come up.
No, it depends on the subject.
Yes.
It depends on how the resolution
is framed.
Is framed, very much so. And I don't think, again, at the cost of repetition, I think we should stop taking that, the Cold War mentality of that we are against a group,
but not for.
But what do we stand for, and what are our interests? And as I said, we will not always be right, but we will have to increasingly take views, and make our position clear. And all decisions are not necessarily easy decisions. It's not all black and white. It's not always positive or always negative. We will have to take these decisions, and as Mr. Nihal Singh rightly pointed out, for instance, on Libya, we went with the African Union and against the Arab League.
Yes.
We've taken a view. I'm not, but of course, shortly thereafter, the reality on the ground changed.
Absolutely.
Okay, we accepted that. Sometimes, like we have double standards. Let's be honest. The Americans, of course, have double standards. They always have had. But for instance, on reordering societies, of course, we have done the same thing.
Sir, when it comes to Iran, the concern is that one, we have had great civilizational relationship with them for centuries. Other thing is the more practical thing of oil. Do you think that if there is a problem with Iran, if we do something which can irritate or break the relationship or come to the brink of that, we would be able to manage without the Iran oil?
Iranian oil, it makes a lot of sense. Even, I spent more years in Moscow than any other place in the world, including my birthplace in Pune.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, because even when we got oil from, let's say, from the Soviet Union, earlier Soviet Union, a lot of it used to actually be transferred from Iraq or Iran because it made sense because of its proximity.
Right.
You burn oil when you're transporting oil.
Right.
So it's a logical part of it. It accounts for about 12% of our oil.
Right, 12%.
It accounts, maybe it's 12% now, but it we can diversify it. There is the story going around that refineries are tuned to taking a particular kind of crude. That's a lot of it that is rubbish, because we take about 30 varieties of crude. So that's not a point. But the point is that it's a logical source of supply. We cannot ignore it, and you cannot change your sources even when you diversify. It takes a period of time. And this is accepted by others also.
Mr. Nihal Singh, there's also this talk going around that in the context of the clash between Iran and the Gulf states and all, Saudi Arabia, which is obviously trying to counter, Saudi Arabia will approach India, may approach or already have approached, saying that you don't bother if you have any problems with Iran. We are there to make up for it. You think that way, does it work that way?
Well, I think they've already said so.
Yes.
From my understanding. It's not that. The point is that I think beyond a certain point, we shall not be able to insist that we will continue taking oil from Iran in the context of geopolitics, in the context of various kinds of pressure. We can't hold out as the only country doing so. Even China, as you know, has been lessening its imports from Iran.
Yeah, right.
So that's the first point. And so the second point is that I agree with Ronen that many of these issues are not black and white. There are great complexities in these issues. And if the Americans, for instance, go flat out and say, no, we have to isolate Iran. So we shall have to decide at that stage how soon we can reduce our supplies of Iranian oil.
Is it only the oil which we are concerned about as far as Iran is concerned, or is there is more to it?
No, but you were talking about civilizational links.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is the last resort.
Yeah.
Whenever we don't have anything common to say, we say they're great civilizational links.
Okay.
Which is true up to a point.
Okay, Mr. Pradhan, so the two gentlemen here think that we have to isolate ourselves from Iran. If it comes to that, we can. Do you think that is a possibility, or that is in the interest of India?
I think we should try our best to navigate our diplomacy, whereby we make our position very clear. At the same time, don't snap our ties with Iran. Iran is quite important for us, and post 92, Israel is equally important for us.
Right.
So that I agree with you that you have to take care of your national interests, but at the same time, you may consider this. Why diplomacy is not being given a chance? So, talking about Saudi Arabia, the Turki Al Faisal, the prince, he has come out with a proposal where he's talking about nuclear weapons free zone. You take the opinion in Israel, 43% are in favor of attacking Iran, 64% are talking about nuclear free zone that includes Israel. And here is a Saudi proposal, and they're very tricky, by the way. Saudi proposal is very tricky. This is why if you come to India need not be dragged into the tension between Iran and Israel. Israel may try to do it, as it has done it preemptively.
Right.
It is premature to conclude that Iran is involved. Whatever I read in the newspaper,
Right.
So India should navigate its diplomacy very carefully. And we should always talk about nuclear weapons free zone. Rajiv Gandhi's proposal was there.
Coming to you, Mr. Ronen Sen, the display of the nuclear might, as we could call it, by Iran by the other day, how important is it? What is the message which they were trying to send?
Actually,
and how does India read that message?
Well, firstly, about this nuclear weapon-free zone, as far as they apply to different regions, our position is, and Rajiv Gandhi's position also had been quite different. We were opposed to it, particularly, for instance, in South Asia, we were completely opposed to it. And we remain opposed to it, even though we were the solitary country which was opposed to it. But we were used to being a lone voice, because on no issue of national security interest to India did we get the support of the non-aligned movement or any other,
right,
of G77 or whatever. So, but I want to make that clear. What Rajiv Gandhi's proposal was for a nuclear weapon-free world.
Right.
Because he said you cannot maintain these zones, because they don't respect, whether it's a nuclear accident like Chernobyl, they don't respect national boundaries or zones. They go over. This issue it's a serious issue, and we have consistently voted in the International Atomic Energy Agency against, not against a country, not against Iran, but the inconsistency between its stated policy as a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty as a non-nuclear weapon state and its activities which we think are inconsistent. And that's why we voted not against Iran, but the proposal of and the findings of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Now, this comes in quick succession after these certain other incidents which happened, which have, as Mr. Nihal Singh pointed out, which has not been proven as far as India is concerned. And also it came together with another, a preemptive, a threat of preemptive cutoff of oil supplies.
Oil supplies to the 6 nations.
EU6, which actually, you know, actually they don't amount to much, actually around about 650,000 barrels per day, which is less than the supply to China, slightly more than what India imports. So that is not a very significant amount. So they could make the gesture, but the timing of the gesture was important. So we have to take this into account, but we'll have to take things, we should not get carried away by these developments. We'll have to take a balanced view, position, taking our interest and see
balanced, Sanjay, balanced view on especially this nuclear issue. Now they are saying that, like we have also always been saying, that, you know, we are using it for only peaceful purposes, but nobody seems to believe Iran.
Yeah, as Mr. Sen pointed out, you know, this is a world of hypocrisy. And I think the issue is that Israel is most uncomfortable with any Arab or, you know, or Persia for that matter, acquiring nuclear weapons in now or in future. And they are the ones who are actually creating a certain kind of hysteria about Iran getting nuclear arms and even trying to goad the Americans, who are most reluctant to get drawn into another war. And the buzz that is being created in the international circles is that, you know, Iran may strike in spring.
The US Defense Secretary the other day, Leon Panatta, said that, you know, in the next 2-3 months Israel may strike against Iran.
And Leon Panatta has said today that US has no evidence of the weaponization of Iran nuclear program.
So, sir,
you know, there is a great amount of contradiction which is at display. What the Israelis are trying to do is to reshape policy United States of America, especially in the election year. They think Obama can be pressured into doing certain things because the Republicans are breathing down his neck.
So is this an election year rhetoric, Mr. Nihal Singh? There are elections not only November in US, I'm told there are elections in Iran. Iran also, parliament elections coming up. Some elections are coming up in Israel also. There is elections.
And China reshaping the entire Politburo.
Yeah. So, you know, is it election time rhetoric?
No, I think it will be too simplistic to ascribe everything to election rhetoric. As far as Israel is concerned, there doesn't have to be an election, because I believe that the American administration, whoever is in power, American president's ability to resist Israeli views is diminishing by the day. So election or no election, the hold on Capitol Hill, of course Ronen would know personally, is so great that not one member, not one senator or House of Representatives member dare say anything anti-Israeli.
Right.
It's that kind of position and hold.
So, Mr. Sen, this kind of hold which they have, so because we saw in the beginning, in about a year, 2 years back when Obama came in, he made some approaches towards Iran. There were a lot of hopes that, you know, maybe the tensions between US and Iran will come down. He made those offers, but still now the whole thing has gone back to square one.
Well, as far as the United States is concerned, you know, when I was ambassador there, and at that time when we were having this negotiations on the nuclear deal, and I had a lot of interaction, people on the Hill, and I told them very clearly that if you expect a quid pro quo on Iran, that we are doing this and therefore you should do this, I said, you forget about it. In fact, then I would request you, Mr. Senator or Congressman, please vote against it, because there will be no quid pro quo. We'll take our own stand. That is very clear. So what we are talking about right now, and that's why I said in the beginning, is not about India's position vis-a-vis that of the United States. what we are talking about today, you have a particular situation in which the United States is taking a particular view, and I agree with Mr. Nihal saying this is not going to change with the change of administration, because it's not just the Jewish lobby. You have a very, very strong majority Christian lobby, evangelical Christian lobby. So it is not one country, a Jewish lobby. It would be wrong to call it that.
Right.
So that's number one. The second is that it is not what is happening in the US Congress, but today you have the majority. So it's a Persian, it's not Iranian, but Persian Arab dimension to it. When you talk of the Gulf, you can't talk about India's sensitivities. We talked about civilization. We can't say the second largest Shia majority country,
right,
which is factually wrong.
Right.
But apart from that, you have the majority, which is Sunni majority opinion there. I mean, you have the whole Arab League,
right,
which is in one. Then you have Europe. So, and then you have a large chunk of the what is known as non-aligned movement, for whatever it's worth.
right.
So you have all these. So it is not
So
India,
it is,
US.
so, but from what you said, your own personal experience of how you dealt with these issues, India has been able to maintain some kind of a balance in these kind of difficult situations also. Mr. Pradhan, last word, you very, very briefly, you think India will be able to come out of this kind of these tensions, still being able to maintain its interests?
I think it should be able to come out. But quickly, while agreeing with the previous two speakers on the nuclear issue, please understand, let me put it in a security perspective. As far as security issues in the West Asia or Middle East, they call it, is concerned, the US official line is they have to accept the Israel line. There's no compromise on that. And that is what Richard Falk talks about. The US and Israel policies remain hostage to the iron cage of militarism. That is the crux.
That is the crux, but that is where the challenge, we are completely run out of time. That's where the challenge for India lies, where we need to keep all these contending forces and contending arguments and still keep our interests alive. But this is something which is not going to happen overnight or anything. It's a continuous process to keep our interests alive amid these challenges. Thanks for watching. Thanks to all my guests, Mr. Ronen, Mr. Nihal Singh, Mr. Pradhan and Sanjay Kapoor. We'll come back with another issue on the big picture.